In high school, I relied on McDonald's Wi Fi in order to complete my online assignments. One particular night was especially memorable. I remember opening up my college application portal and I started to cry. I had been accepted to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which was my top choice. It was my so called dream school. The place I aspire to be at, I got into. But these feelings of joy were ephemeral, they were incredibly temporary, as the very school which my acceptance to made me cry caused me to cry for an entirely different reason years later when I was expelled. What's up, everyone? My name is Tyler Adolfo. Thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to talk about my expulsion from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I want to say right off the bat that this isn't a hit piece. This isn't bitterness. Rather, this is a reflection and a testimony to the lived experience I went through, the highs and lows of UMass, my leading up to the expulsion, what transpired, what, if anything at all, went wrong to cause me to get to that position where I was kicked out of university. And I'm going to talk about the lessons I've learned. I'll delineate them later on in the video. And I'll discuss where I'm at in life right now. But it's never fun to start a story in the middle. I want to start at the beginning. Because my first 2 years at UMass, my freshman year, my sophomore year, were phenomenal. I tried out for and made it onto the highly competitive mock trial team. I remember we won our very first tournament of the year. I got elected to the student government, where I served on the Student Senate Finance Committee. I was appointed to the Faculty Senate Program and Budget Council. And most importantly, my work as a student was going well. I was assiduously committed to my academics, and my academic performance those first 2 years was impeccable. Notably, UMass Amherst provided me with this euphoric feeling that I had never really felt up until that point in my life. And that's that UMass Amherst felt like a home to me. I felt accepted for who I was. I felt like I was in the right place, and I felt like I was laying a solid foundation for my future. 19 credit course loads, time consuming extracurriculars, a global pandemic with extremely depressing but necessary lockdowns couldn't knock me off my game. So, what was the spark that finally did? What was that transformative moment? The truth of the matter is, my junior year, I suffered from a 6 month long bipolar manic episode. And Mania didn't take my life away all at once. It wasn't immediate. It chipped away at it. It took it piece by piece, and it was convincing me each step forward was growth, even as I was walking away, eventually sprinting away from myself, and I became this character that was antithetical to who I actually was and who people actually knew me to be. I was living in a frat house at the time, going into my junior year. I had pledged the previous semester, and I was a proud member of the Kappa Sigma fraternity. I took on multiple positions in the fraternity: chapter historian, social media manager. In the pledge class, I was pledge class vice president. But living in the frat house, I started to lose a significant amount of sleep. And as I was sleeping less and less, and also consuming voluminous amounts of alcohol, smoking cannabis from time to time, I think that the combination of these actions compounded and produced a mental state in myself that was destructive and that was detrimental to my overall well-being and most notably my stability. I started to experience a wide array of delusions and eventually even hallucinations. The delusions started off with grandiosity, thinking that I was on top of the world, I was this perfect person, and I would make to-do lists in these little mini notebooks where I would list like 40 things a day, and I would methodically go through each of the things that I enumerated for any given day. And as time went on, my productivity declined, in large part due to my lack of sleep. I was eventually hospitalized in a psych ward, and it's here where I started to experience hallucinations as well. And this was very early into my 6-month long manic episode. It began around October 2021, and by October 28th of 2021, I was in the Cooley Dickinson psych ward. So here I was in this psych ward, a place meant to bring me back to reality, yet my mind was still sprinting ahead, reframing everything around me in ways that kept this episode alive, this nonsensical distortion of the world for what it really is. I was totally out of character, I was totally out of my mind, I was totally out of place. The psych ward actually exacerbated many of my symptoms. The symptoms got significantly worse. I wasn't put on any medications whatsoever, and I was released after approximately 5 days. So early November 2021, I left the psych ward, and I was back in the community. Leading up to the psych ward, there was an event, I'll refer to it as an event, that took place at Campus Pond, which is a popular place on campus. It's something that we as UMass students are all very proud of, that me as a UMass student I was very proud of. And I arranged, or attempted to arrange, a press conference at Campus Pond where it was my aim to discuss the corruption going on campus. And these were influenced by the delusions, not being mitigated by any medications whatsoever. So here I was at Campus Pond talking about corruption, hopefully trying to talk about the sexual assaults taking place in Greek life and how I was going to expose it all. Police officers met me there at Campus Pond, UMass police, and to their credit, they were actually rather professional, and they didn't talk me down by any means. I was still acting way out of character. I was still manic out of my mind. I didn't have the insight to know something was wrong with me. And I remember attempting to explain to them this press conference that I was going to hold, that it was going to be tremendous, and we're going to expose all these things, and we're going to make this a brighter and better place. And let me preface my ride to the hospital with something that not many people may know, and that is, I did impact the community in positive ways, even while manic. There's one notable example. I got covered in the New York Times for raising awareness about sexual assault and initiating a fundraising campaign for sexual assault victims, such as Futures Without Violence and End Rape on Campus. Now, as someone who's personally a sexual assault survivor from childhood, this was an issue of personal, profound importance to me, and I wanted to do things right. And so I organized through the Kappa Sigma fraternity this sexual assault awareness campaign, and the post is still up on the Instagram, Kappa Sigma UMass. If you scroll down far enough, you'll see it, posted in 2021, sensitive content warning. I drafted that entire statement that talks about how perpetuators of sexual assault should be prosecuted, how we as a community have to do better, drawing attention to resources available on campus and off campus to victims and survivors. And that project received overwhelming praise from the community. It's still, to this day, the most liked, engaged posts on the Kappa Sigma UMass Instagram, and there have been probably more than 100 posts since then. and hundreds of posts on the account altogether, and that's the most liked post. And I was the one who initiated that campaign. And because of that campaign, I was contacted by a New York Times reporter at the time, and he interviewed me. And I have an iconic quote in the New York Times as a result where I call my own brothers jackasses. Not with ill intent, but nonetheless, it was a funny quote. And maybe in hindsight, some people don't think it's that funny, but at the moment, my brothers, who I was living in the house with, thought it was hilarious, and they agreed with me as far as that quote goes. And so now here I was on the ambulance ride. I thought I was going to have a press conference and be part of some major news story again, but that didn't happen. The actual professionalism that I had demonstrated prior in the semester, the actual probability of me getting in the news for something good or beneficial to the community, once again, was highly unlikely. I mean, it was incredibly improbable. So I went to the hospital, and the staff were really confounded by my mental state. And I've analyzed the hospital notes, long later, much later, in the aftermath of what happened. And I read that, I was experiencing suicidal ideation, that I was saying things along the lines of, I'm the next Andrew Carnegie of this century, but I'm not going to pay my employees slave labor. And at this time, I was just saying and doing a lot of nonsensical, ridiculous things. As the semester went on, once I was released from the hospital, things got worse. I started disseminating these lengthy text messages, primarily to members of my fraternity, where I would talk about additional projects that I would be doing because of the New York Times success. And these lengthy texts, surprisingly, for a while, people responded to them because they did see the New York Times article, and they thought maybe for a brief period of time, keyword brief period of time, that I was still in a proper mental state, but I wasn't. So I sent out these lengthy texts, and eventually people started to distance themselves from me, and just weren't really sure how to deal with the fact that there's this 20-something-year-old living in the frat house and part of their fraternity, saying and doing all these nonsensical things. He's having hallucination phone calls in the backyard, walking back and forth, talking to someone on the other end who's not even there. And in my head, I heard voices. So to this day, I'm still totally shocked and in disbelief at this premise that these people I was talking to were fictional, but they were. I became antagonistic and accusatory towards those that I care deeply about. I started accusing my own fraternity brothers of being, communist agents or being affiliated with the Nazis, and I just had the strong suspicion that people were out to get me, and that my frat in particular, my fraternity in particular, was angry at me for my attempted press conference, which of course they weren't. They understood that there was something wrong with me, and by and large, they were very empathetic and understanding. And I forgot to mention, when I was actually in the hospital, scores and scores of members of the fraternity, I'm talking dozens, came to visit in person. Dozens more sent me text messages of support, saying that I could vent to them anytime. But my nonsensical communications, my delusional interactions were not limited to my fraternity. I also started sending out bizarre emails to professors, one of which was my favorite professor of all time, Sut Jolly, of the communication department. If you haven't taken a class with him and you're a UMass student, I highly recommend it. His classes are so engaging, super informative, and I've kept my notebooks for that class just because of how interesting and engaging I found those courses of his to be. I started posting on social media sporadically, so in addition to sending these emails to Professor Sut Jolly, I'm sorry, Professor Jolly, if you see this, and I do appreciate the empathy that you showed me throughout that semester. I remember there was a time after class I came up to you and I was ranting endlessly about my delusions and things that I thought were going on and believed to be going on, and you said to me, "But are you okay?" And you were concerned with whether or not I was okay. And all these years later, that does mean a lot to me because not a lot of people asked that question during that time period. Not a lot of people even asked that question all these years later. And so, for the empathy that you showed, I sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. I ended up, and this is where we get to the action that specifically led to my expulsion. The semester eventually ended, as of course it would, and I somehow managed to survive it. I was still super manic, out of my mind by the end of it. While moving property, transporting property from my frat house to home, I got into a fight with a former friend of mine. And I'm not proud of this, but it's a fight that I started. It was under the circumstances of being in severe mania with psychosis. Fortunately, nobody was severely hurt, seriously injured, but I do feel bad about it because this was my former childhood best friend, and the trauma that I inflicted in itself is a form of harm that goes beyond the scope of physical. Harm is not just limited to physical harm, there's also emotional and mental harm, and I will forever regret my actions that day. And I don't want to steer away from any facts of the situation or omit certain facts from the incident. I literally used a pocket knife, and so I'm very fortunate that in that fight that I started while severely mentally ill, that this person I fought was not seriously harmed. That's the one takeaway that I have from that I can look back at and be like, whew. Not just because of the legal troubles that would inevitably come, but because of the fact that I would feel terrible if something, permanent were to have happened. And I was charged with it regardless. I was charged with 2 felonies: armed assault with intent to murder and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. I spent 5 days in jail, and even while I was in jail, I was manic out of my mind. I was telling officers that I was related to John F. Kennedy, that I was going to run for governor of Massachusetts, that the Illuminati was after me. Once I got out of jail, I was released on the condition that I seek a mental health evaluation, and on the condition that I avoid the person I had got into that physical fight with. So I complied with those stipulations. I got a mental health evaluation, which concluded that I was undoubtedly severely manic. Years later, I just want to wrap up the legal component of this. I was not found guilty, and the charges were actually entirely dismissed because the court procured the services of a forensic psychologist, and that expert arrived at the conclusion that I should not be held criminally responsible because I was under severe mental defect at the time of the incident and was not capable of appreciating the difference between right and wrong due to the mitigating factor of my mental health episode. I was in a crisis, and so I got out of that situation as best as I could. That's probably the best outcome I could have had. There's plenty of people with bipolar disorder suffering in prisons right now for actions that I can now attest to they arguably didn't have control over because they lacked control of their central command center like I did. They were influenced by severe delusions and hallucinations, which acted as a catalyst for them to act in ways that were not ordinary for themselves. Going back to the incident, me being released from jail, a police report, an officer actually sent a copy of the report over to the university dean's office. I received a series of emails, which I didn't actually see initially, essentially saying that I had been suspended until an investigation can occur. I ended up missing a committee hearing where I could have presented my case. I didn't see any of the emails because my computer was among the belongings that were in the car of the person I got in a fight with, and the police, with their wisdom and genius, put all my belongings, including my laptop, family heirlooms, which is what I care more about, but they put all of that back in the car of the person I fought with, as if it was his property. And I remember in the police report they said, like, oh, we did it for safekeeping. Yeah, thanks. But I digress. I had to have some kind of consequence for my actions, regardless of if there was a mitigating factor of mental health, which there was. And I don't beat myself up entirely over the fact that I lost those items. Do I wish I still had them? Of course. There's family heirlooms, things that I had from my grandmother that she gave me on my deathbed, but there's consequences in life, including for things where you may not be culpable or deserving of blame. So, because my computer was gone, I didn't see any of the emails. Eventually, though, I did see the emails and saw that they had already made me an expelled student. And when you get expelled from UMass, there's one opportunity to appeal that expulsion decision, and you appear before a committee which would consist of some faculty and even students in some cases. I appeared before this committee while still in a completely manic state, full-blown mania with psychosis, and I said things that were bizarre and totally out of character and antithetical to who I was. I talked about corruption. I talked about how there would be legal consequences for those who were prosecuting me, and I just said a series of things that were untruthful, uncorroborated, unsubstantiated. And what kind of blows my mind to this day, and I don't want to cast heavy shame here, I just think it's something that's interesting, and I think it's a testament to how we need more knowledge of mental health and what it looks like, specifically bipolar disorder, is that nobody in this appeal meeting saw that I was acting bizarre and strange. Maybe they did, but they didn't make any note of it. They took my manic arguments as if they were legitimate, and they wrote them down and evaluated them, and as opposed to saying, wow, this is someone who needs help, they said, this is someone who needs to be punished. And they very quickly arrived at the conclusion that I should be expelled from the university. I mean, I used a pocket knife on somebody. I got in a fight. It's clear reckless behavior. It's clear threatening behavior. It's clear aggressive behavior, violation of the student code of conduct. I understand why I got expelled. I just wish that there would have been a professional in the room who could have advocated on my behalf, because I was not in a position, under the circumstances I was facing in my own mental psychology, in order to be an effective advocate for myself. So I wish in hindsight that would have happened, but it didn't. Just like I wish, like in the hospital, I would have been put on some kind of medication or not released until I was actually better. And this is not, I don't want this to be interpreted as like me casting blame. It's just me stating the facts for what they are. So if anyone ever tries to tell you a story of what happened, I want you to remember these facts, right? John Adams said facts are stubborn things, and the fact is I was released from the psych ward with no medications while in a manic state. In the medical notes at Coley Dickinson, it talks about how I have hallucination phone calls, and they released me the day after, saying that I showed significant improvement. I mean, talk about credibility. And the fact is, this meeting that I had, the appeal to the expulsion, I clearly wasn't in a mentally right state. You don't have to be a psychologist to have recognized that. I've ordered the materials from that hearing, because as a former student, I'm entitled to the documents that were used to evaluate me by these judges. And looking at the statements I made, it's just so incredibly astonishing to me that nobody heard that and thought to themselves, maybe we should call the cops and get this young guy some help. I wish that would have happened, but it didn't. So I became expelled. There's two lessons I've learned from this experience. Number one is that setbacks can interrupt your path, but they do not define your future. Without question, this bipolar manic episode threw me off my path, sent me on a negative trajectory. I spent 4 years out of university as a result, trying to regain my sanity, trying to reclaim my confidence, trying to rebuild my competence in order to be successful in an academic environment once again. Because for a long period of time, as you can imagine, I was incredibly depressed. I felt large amounts of embarrassment and shame as a result of the things I had said and done during Mania. But I never surrendered hope. I kept persisting, and with diligence and commitment, I was able to arrive to a healthier place. In fall 2025, 4 years after I entered Mania, I was able to return to university again. I transferred to a new university, and I'm studying communication with pre-law. So it's not over until you say it's over. Never give up. But the second lesson I would extract from this story, and this video is going kind of long, I apologize, is that burnout is real and stress can 100% act as a catalyst for serious harm. I ardently believe that I took too much on my plate. I do adhere to this idea that living in the fraternity house was not the best fit for me. Being in the fraternity in itself wasn't an issue, but living in a loud environment where there were parties 3 nights a week and investing too much of my time in the fraternity with 2 elected positions, I wasn't operating at a normative standard. I was deviations below what would constitute normal. And looking back, if there was something I could change, and I don't think this would have, made my manic episode impossible to happen. I think I always would have had a manic episode at some point. Bipolar disorder runs in my family. I'm predisposed to the condition. This illness is highly genetic. I think that the environment just sped up the process of the characteristics of bipolar demonstrating themselves. And so I don't think that this was something that could have been entirely avoided, but it could have been handled a lot better on my part. And what I would have done is more carefully allocate my time, find more balance, not take on burdensome course loads, and not neglect sleep. Never sleep on the importance of sleep, my friends, especially if you have a severe mental health condition like bipolar disorder. It's a recipe for disaster. I learned that the hard way. So I briefly mentioned kind of where I'm at now, and this is where I'll wrap things up. I'm on 4 medications now for my bipolar disorder: Wellbutrin, lamotrigine, Vraylar, and Lexapro. It took me a long time to find this medication cocktail that worked so well for me. It took a lot of trial and error, but I've gone years upon years now without experiencing any symptoms whatsoever. And they do have negatives, like I went from 180 pounds to a peak of 354. As you can see, I'm still trying to work on getting those pounds off. But they saved my life. These medications pulled me out of the depths of mania, restored my intellectual faculties and my sanity, and were it not for that, who knows where I would be today. Like, I might not be here today without these medications. I actually strongly believe that. These medications saved my life, and the pros disproportionately outweigh any cons that come along with them. I was able to get a job again, accumulate some job experience. I thought after this episode that I would never work again, so that was huge for me. And in addition to getting a job again, I started applying to schools, and I got into one of the schools I applied to, I transferred to. I explained my story. I was honest and open about what had transpired at UMass Amherst. I didn't hold back, and they looked at my story and said, yeah, we'd love to have you as a student. And it meant the world to me that there was an institution out there willing to give me that second chance and to grant me that opportunity to continue my higher education. And in the long run, my goal now is to go to law school and become an attorney. More specifically, I want to practice Social Security disability law so that I can be an advocate for people who find themselves in similar positions as I did. Now, someone with bipolar disorder going into that profession will be an extreme challenge. both in law school and once out of law school. But I know that I can do it. I'm an intelligent guy, I'm a hardworking guy, and want to use my voice as a vehicle to foment positive change, to advocate for others. Even though the pay for Social Security disability lawyers isn't particularly high relative to other legal fields, it's intrinsically rewarding. And I want to make sure no one else out there is left alone. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. That's the story of how I got expelled from UMass and what I've learned. Love, light, and tranquility to all. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Appreciate each and every one of you.